Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this short discussion with myself. My name is Dan Howells, and I've got Warren here, who is the founder of Hytro. Just a little bit about my background. I'm a performance practitioner. I've had experience as a strength and conditioning coach across Olympic, Paralympic sports, and I've spent some time in the US as well, working in baseball with the Houston Astros. And my knowledge of BFR brings me to want to interview Warren today. We're going to have an active discussion about the use cases of blood flow restriction. And so, Warren, I thought we could just start off with helping those that are tuning in now understand, I guess, the evolution of BFR and where we're at present day with its use.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. So we're probably all seeing it at the moment. There's this groundswell around the use of BFR. So traditionally, it's been more of the rehab space in clinical settings. And we're now seeing this swell into the performance space. So we're seeing it used for preparation and prior to training. We're seeing it used during training as an exercise modality. And the big one really that we're seeing the most utility or the largest growth in recent years is in the recovery space. And yeah, today we'll go into each of those three different verticals with a particular focus on recovery. And we're also going to split off into some sports specificity for you to listen to as well.
Nice one. Okay, cool. So let's start with, I guess, the most common use case being trainings and/or rehabilitation. So just explain a little bit about how that works, how BFR can benefit the training space for an athlete.
Sure. So, I mean, as I mentioned, BFR has traditionally been used in the rehabilitation setting in a training modality. And it's because you can use it with really low loads. You can do body weight, you can do 20 to 30% 1 RM, and you're still going to stimulate those physiological adaptations like you're lifting heavy, right? So what we commonly employ is around a 70 to 80% limb occlusion pressure. And we do a repetition scheme of about 75 reps. And that's split into 4 sets. So typically it's 30 repetitions followed by 30 seconds rest, followed by 3 sets of 15 repetitions with 30 seconds rest between. And the thought process behind that first set of 30 seconds is almost like a primer. So we're desaturating that muscle, creating some lactate, some metabolite buildup to stress the tissues, to then go on and do the working sets. And because of this, it accelerates or magnifies the impact of light intensity activity. So for rehab, incredible. We can also take that into the healthy athlete space. So you can actually do this with athletes who aren't injured. So you've gone beyond the return to play, they're back playing, and now you can continue to enhance adaptations by adding it into the sessions, maybe as a finisher, maybe on a rest day where you want to get some additional adaptations into that individual athlete. And not only is it used in the more hypertrophy strength sense, but it's also used for improving muscular endurance. So we can use it on bikes, we can use it walking, rowers, some cardiovascular work. And this would be more of about a 15-minute protocol. You can either do it continuous or you can split it into 3 5s with a minute rest in between. And essentially what we're doing here is we're desaturating the muscles again, reducing oxygen, creating a load of stress, and making the tissues adapt by increasing capillarization and mitochondrial biogenesis.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a bit of an overview on training.
Yeah, from the practitioner point of view, I'm always thinking about stimulus and adaptation, stimulus and response. What training we're doing and what we're getting out of it. And BFR for me is a classic bang for buck methodology. In terms of the optimal outcomes we can get from relatively minimal input compared to traditional methods of strength training. And that's why we've seen it boom in the rehab space over the last 20, 30 years. Definitely through my career, I've seen it used in every single performance space for rehabilitation. But the use case, that you described there about endurance exercise is less well known, where people are training with occluded limbs and they're getting quite potent responses in terms of time trials and time to complete performance efforts, etc. And some of that probably is to do with the capillarization effects or buffering as well. And so we've got different stimuluses. We'll have a cascade of events that create different responses. And I'm definitely seeing BFR being quite a versatile tool in terms of a performance solution space. And I guess that brings us into the lesser known verticals, as you call them. Firstly, recovery. Explain a little bit about how it's being used in that way in performance sport.
Sure. So as you said, it is it's quite an exciting space. It's the lesser known, but definitely becoming more well-known space for BFR. And that's because it has a really, really good ability at kind of getting your neuromuscular function back, kind of replenishing glycogen in the tissues, and basically getting your athletes ready to play again in the preceding next few days. And there's two distinct ways that recovery BFR is applied. One is passively, so that is independent of exercise, and that will be dependent on the logistics and environment you find yourself in. So, for example, traveling, you don't have equipment, you will probably just do passive BFR while on a bus or a flight. However, if you're in facility and you have access to equipment, you would be probably doing some active recovery anyway. So things like bike flushes, stretching, mobility. You can add BFR into that to compound and improve the efficacy of those protocols. So yeah, two distinct ways to do it, passively and actively, which depends on your logistical environment that you find yourself in.
Nice. And what I find exciting is that there's a lot more research in this space that people actually don't know about, showing proven efficacy of accelerating return to function. I think we could classify recovery as how fast can we get somebody back to function. And I actually saw a paper this morning about the different time courses of restoration of full muscle function based on how somebody's being trained, whether it was isometrically, eccentrically, whether it's a maximal time to exhaustion. And each one has a different time course. And essentially, BFR is trying to accelerate that time course and has been proven to do quite successfully, actually, which is really exciting. Let's move. We'll get into some more specifics later about sport-specific environments. But the last vertical then that we've described is this preparation opportunity for BFR. Let's just share some insight into that.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the protocols for preparation, they're very similar to recovery, which I realized we didn't cover there, but it's typically 3 lots of 5 minutes of BFR applied with a couple of minutes unstrapped reperfusion in between. And the hypothesis or thought process behind its use for pre-activation, and there is evidence, sorry, these aren't just hypotheses, but we're driving nutrient-rich blood into the tissues. So we're enhancing the warming effect of the structures, the ligaments and tendons, which are typically avascular, but BFR helps drive blood into them, and also in the muscle tissues. So we get this greater warming, we improve elasticity and kind of range of motion due to this. And finally, we create something, or we enhance something called analgesia. So this is pain relieving. So we actually increase an athlete's pain threshold. Therefore, anything they choose to do thereafter in exercise, their RPUs are lower for the same given workload. So it's actually been shown to improve performance, not only, reduce injury risk as well. So it's a pretty, it's becoming a much more widely used utility of BFR.
Yeah, we're seeing this commonly used passive modality of 3 times 5 minutes occluded, 2 to 3 minutes of unocclusion in order to reperfuse oxygen-rich blood into the muscles. And that case that you just described there of pre-exercise, actually used with rugby players prior to repeat sprints. And although we didn't see performance enhanced, what we did see was perception of relative effort dramatically reduced, which obviously when people are starting high intensity exercise can have a positive effect on performance. That's really, really cool.
Can I just jump on that point? Actually, we finished some research, Gloucester Rugby independently conducted some research on exactly that, and they did a match pairs crossover design, 2 groups, and they did 15 minutes of a typical warm up versus the same warm up with BFR applied, and then they did 10 repetitions of a 60-kilo prowler push over 22 meters, and it was on the minute every minute. And basically, what they found is, after 6 repetitions, both groups performed exactly the same, but reps 7 to 10, there was a stark difference in time. So the BFR warm-up group was significantly faster on the last 4 reps versus the other group. So their performance was actually improved drastically. And the only difference was adding BFR to the 15-minute warm-up. So just a good example of the use.
Yeah. There's a ton of research out there that we can't cover off in this short discussion. But I think just to review, we're going to now start pivoting towards more specificity. But just as a reflection and summary, you've got 3 key opportunities to use BFR in the performance space in terms of preparation, training, and recovery.
So Dan, you spent a number of years over in the US working in baseball. So I'd love to understand your thoughts on the current use of BFR in baseball and what opportunities you see for the use of BFR in baseball athletes.
Yeah, for sure. The experience I had stepping into baseball was that there was already a a use of BFR in the recovery space with pitchers, specifically pitchers who were rotating and pitching every 5 days generally, because it's such a high frequency occurrence of such high intensity work for them that I witnessed a modality, BFR, blood flow restriction, being used to such a level that players did not want to give up that experience. They recognized how much more recovered they were in the 24 hours post use. So if they were pitching late at night on a Saturday, Sunday they felt much better for having used BFR the night before, immediately post game. And then that bought them back time. They were able to get back to throwing, which is really important for such a skilled athlete like a pitcher. And it brought them back time. It gave them extra opportunities to train. So I was seeing that happen, and to really good effect, and made me think about some of the ways I tried to use it in team sports back in England. Alternatively, you didn't see it used so much with your positional players. Okay. And I sat there and I wondered why that was. And it was generally because the equipment that we were using for pitchers was clinical grade equipment, regulated at the moment, but quite cumbersome. And when you've got one athlete and you have to support them as a practitioner, you can understand why you're going to have to stay with that athlete and help them through things when you've got lots of technology to deal with. And I think it was that. I think it was the inability to scale that use across the team that probably restricted us from using it with positional players. That said, now when I think about what I've learned about BFR since the team sports I've worked with, football, soccer in particular, that's a place that I would be trying to use BFR from a recovery point of view with the positional players, because their game density is every day. It's not as high intensity, but it's every day, 162 games across 182 days. So recovery is obviously critical. And they're also training every day. They haven't got an affordance to offload training so much because they need to keep developing their skills. So we've got one use case with pitchers being used very frequently over the last probably 5-6 years. And then positional players at the time just wasn't being used frequently. I think it was that barrier to entry of access of equipment, to be honest.
That makes perfect sense. So yeah, it's something that you've been exposed to in the world of baseball, but you hadn't seen it scaled yet because of equipment complexities. It makes sense.
Yeah.
What about travel? So obviously they're playing nearly every single day in baseball and they're all over the country. How does recovery look while
Yeah. So, I mean, for those who are working in baseball, they'll know that 250 athletes across an organization spread across, 8 to 10 different teams or affiliates. The major league team is going to be flying from A to B. Every 3 or 4 days, they might fly to a different destination. What naturally wants to happen is that players want to get out of their environment and into the next city quickly. So recovery does get challenged. And when you have to use technologies that have to be used in place, or ice baths that can't be lifted and taken on a plane, that limits your recovery. And sometimes it's compromised, or witnessed it being compromised. And so for me, that BFR use on the buses towards the airport could be a really great use that I didn't yet see back in my time, a few years ago now, but I didn't see it at the time. But Hytro affords that opportunity because it's a wearable garment, and it's a piece of equipment in the training bag of every athlete, as opposed to one expensive bit of kit that has to be shared across the group.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty critical point, isn't it? So if you had Hytro when you were at the Astros, is that something you would have employed with your athletes for recovery, day to day, for travel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we're here to talk about, our experiences in hindsight, right? Hindsight for me, if I could go back and do my time again in terms of decisions around recovery, and I was aware of the product like Hytro, and I was aware of the research of its validated pressure, its safe and autonomous use cases, as well as efficacy and safety, then I would absolutely be exploring it, especially with my affiliate players. The budget lines in big teams, the professional teams, is obviously going to be quite great. But as we work down towards the bottom 50 players in that 250 player development stream, less resources available, less budget. But recovery is still just as important for them. They're trying to perform every single day. And so I see it now as a really cost-effective tool upon which organizations can invest in to give every athlete the opportunity to use BFR. I think that's the big difference when we have a bit of like a watt bike that, one watt bike between 20 athletes, I can use it if it's not being used by someone else, and that's the same across recovery equipment as well. So 100%. I would go back, and I'd be using it with my positional players. I think the ones that are playing every day, the ones that are on the field all the time, the ones that are stressed by the system of baseball the most, in the sense of time affordance they have to give up to the sport, which limits their ability to spend time recovering. It's a source of recovery I can give them to take home. Come off the park at 11 o'clock at night and have to be back at the ballpark 12 noon the next day. People just want to get back home and get the big rock sorted, just, sleep.
That's crucial.
So you can go on.
So it's absolutely crucial. I think the concept of that other 20 hours we like to talk about in sports science. It's when you're away from the club, you're still a professional athlete, and you should be doing everything you can to be, your recovery. So something like BFR away from the club setting, it makes perfect sense. And just ask a really quick question. So we've spoke a lot about teams innovating with BFR and finding new ways to use BFR, because there's such a wide array of pressures that work, that are effective, rep ranges that work, different protocols. Is there anything specific to baseball that you think might be an innovative thing that teams could try using BFR, perhaps some shoulder care and banded work?
Well, I think let's go back to probably where they're already innovating ahead of, I guess, other teams. Is that I witnessed BFR being used immediately post game by pitchers who had done a ton of high intensity work, and they needed to start recovery, which is great. But there's also another element of their, I guess, resilience, which is arm care, their shoulder resilience. And what we found was that time that was available for our pitchers was quite finite to be focused and want to recover. And so they have it stacked. It was already a method already in there. So credit to the team for innovating ahead of their time as such, and stacking their arm care routines as a stimulus that coincided with passive BFR, which actually became active BFR. They were doing 5-minute rounds of arm care at very low resistance, coupled with a very ischemic, occlusive environment. And that seemed to work really well, both from a behavior point of view, because we gave 2 solutions in one effort for an athlete, and also the efficacy then of the resultant 24, 36 hours in terms of getting them back. In terms of other ways to innovate, is I'd be thinking about coupling other methods as well. All professional teams have other ways to recover, whether that's hydrotherapy and pools available to them, or cold therapy, cryotherapy, even saunas and those environments. And we're starting to see in other sports where I think baseball could benefit from the use of BFR in each one of those environments. I guess the alert or red flag in people's minds listening to that might be, we can't put technology in water. Well, that's where I'm seeing the case uses of Hytro in other sports, and how that could be transferred to baseball, because it is a safe garment-based solution that can be strapped in, worn in a cryotherapy sense. I guess it'd probably be worth you sharing that experience a little bit as well, in terms of what you've seen across team sport environments with this habit stacking and innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really crucial point, isn't it, to speak to the innovation of coaches that are trialing new methodologies using BFR. And I think that's also important, because it's testament to they're listening to the research that exists, and they've got a big green tick because we know BFR is safe, and they're able to then go and innovate, because it's not novel. We're just trying it in new novel ways. Something that I've seen a lot of success with actually is the combination of BFR with nutritional intake. So what we're seeing is this kind of anchoring effect, or this habit stacking, whereby an athlete will onboard a recovery shake post-competition, whether that's a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio carbohydrate to protein, depending on the team. And what we're seeing is coaches giving the recovery shake, administering the BFR, and then coaching them through it for the first time and saying, how did you feel when you unstrapped from the BFR? And the athlete will inevitably say something like, I felt a relief, or I felt this cold sensation, which will be the blood flushing that they will feel. And then the coach would say something like, well, that is the recovery shake being, injected into your muscle tissues, essentially being absorbed. The athlete then anchors that behavior because they can physically feel it. There's a feedback loop for them to hold on to. And then they think, so it's working. And then every time they have a recovery shake, they think, well, I need to do my BFR so that I can enhance my nutrient intake. So we found driving behavior change in that way to be incredibly impactful and effective. And recovery shakes are had at, anytime. It's not just post game, it could be on recovery days. But if they're anchoring that behavior, they're going to want to do the BFR, which as a coach is important. We need buy-in from athletes to buy into these techniques.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably the most common utility. The other one will be in the ice bath. And again, we're trying to look at marrying some of the science here. There's no published research on this, but we can make an educated guess and hypotheses based around the science that does exist. So with an ice bath, we get cold shock proteins, we get reduced muscle soreness, removal of inflammation, but we get a downregulation of muscle protein synthesis, which obviously is not great for adaptation, good for recovery, but not great for adaptation is an ice bath. So we remove it in pre-season typically. However, with BFR added in the ice bath, think of it as a dimmer switch. We've turned the MPS down, but with BFR, we turn that back up. And actually, does that super compensate? Because BFR is an incredible driver of muscle protein synthesis. So if so, A, we can enhance the recovery benefit of ice by doing BFR in season. But B, and I think this is a pretty crucial one actually, is that we could do ice baths in pre-season if we can prove that MPS is upregulated, because now it becomes something that promotes adaptation. So again, just some ways of thinking about habit stacking BFR with other modalities to enhance the offering.
Yeah. I love listening to you talk about that stuff, because the first case as well, when you're educating an athlete, is the art of coaching. It's the creating the relatedness for an individual as to why it's purposeful and meaningful to them and how it can help them. And then the second example is taking two evidence-based situations and creating your own practice-based evidence environment. And sometimes there's this, not this fear, but this apprehension around trying something new within sports performance environments. But we're definitely seeing that the adopters of using BFR in use cases beyond just training are the ones that are taking the evidence, the logical things that they understand about BFR benefit, and coupling them together and seeing some really, really exciting outcomes for sure. I was just thinking and reflecting as you were talking that one of the unique experiences I had in baseball was the sheer number of athletes relative to the coach. And aside from the major league roster, which would have 2 S&C coaches for 25 players, most other teams were working with 1 S&C or 1 performance coach and 1 athletic trainer for 25 athletes. And 25 individuals really, who were all preparing in their own way on a day. There's not too much of a team technical, tactical component to the game in the preparation. And that itself requires a level of autonomy in your playing athlete group if you're going to optimize the performance preparation solutions for each individual athlete. And they're all on different time schedules and different calendars throughout the day. So I was just thinking, I've just written down 1 to 25. BFR, a scalable solution like Hytro, it's going to be exciting to be used in that way to optimize recovery for different people with different methods.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to round this out as well, because it's relevant for most sports, right? You look at football where there's 60 to 90 individuals on the roster. Then you look at college sports where there's even more than that. You need something that can be used autonomously if you want it to be used. Otherwise, it's a one-on-one, N=1 supervised methodology, and that's just not scalable. So something like Hytro is giving and affording that opportunity for coaches to rubber stamp of approval. This is safe. This is effective. Athlete, here you go away and do it in your own time or in facility or whatever it is. But I think that's a really good example in baseball where they have huge numbers of athletes and that's transferable to other sports. But Dan, listen, that's been an incredible discussion.
Nice.
We'll go into other sports in just as much detail in the future as well. But yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.